Namaste. My name is Dr. Ramesh Pattni. I am a Hindu theologian and a psychologist as well. And my interest is really looking at the intersection between um, religion and psychology. And today I'm going to talk about death and dying. So few weeks ago, my little great niece was asking me that so many people are dying. And I get so scared because when I listen about people dying, and I say to myself, I wonder what happens when people die, and I wonder what happens once the person who is no longer here, where does he go? Where does she go? What happens to them? And I'm told by my mom that, they go through various different places and then something happens and they have to come back again, depending on what kind of life they've lived. And I wonder if you can tell me, respected Nana, how to understand all this. So a smart little girl, and she asked me this question because there is some anxiety in her, which is saying, I need to understand this thing which is called death. I need to understand a bit about that. And at the same time, then my niece and her husband also started asking me, actually, we don't even understand some of the things. Although we have seen that, various ceremonies take place, there are so many elaborate rituals which happen after uh, 11 days, 10 days, 13 days. And we know, and we've seen this, but actually to understand this thing, sometimes we don't understand. So maybe we will also benefit by, listening to you when you explain this to our daughter. So I said, okay, let's think about this. So I created a kind of uh, uh, slideshow, which then I explained to them, this is how it is. So I'm going to share this slide with you, and then I will kind of talk about the whole process of the journey towards death, the death itself, cremation, and what happens to the jiva once it kind of makes its way towards the land of the ancestors. So I'm going to share this slide with you. So what happens after that? This is really, the central question as what we are going to think about. And death and afterlife. And of course, when we talk about what happens after death, we are already assuming that there is something which happens after death. That once we see this body in front of you, which was alive, which was moving about, which was breathing, which was talking, which was walking around, and this body is no longer doing any of those things. So what has happened? And what happens to what we call the soul, which departs from this physical gross body? So in order to put it into context, I'm going to talk about some of the beliefs and concepts and ideas about death and life in our Hindu traditions. And I'm also going to talk about stages of death and the journey beyond, followed by the ceremony of Shraddha after death. And these are the offerings which are done to the Pitta. They are the kind of ceremonies which we observe when somebody dies. It can happen. There are 3 ceremonies which normally take place at the 10th day, 11th day, 12th day. And these are the offerings which are done to the Pitta. And there is a reason why this is done as well. And there's a kind of deep philosophical thought behind the ceremonies which take place. And finally, the ceremony of Shraddha, which is Pitrapaksha, which comes once a year, and these are the 15 days of the days of the ancestors, where everybody makes offerings to the departed ancestors and to kind of pray to them and feed them, and this is done normally once a year. So I'm going to talk about all these things, and in the sense that death and afterlife consists of so many things besides just the the event of death, and really what happens after life, and how some of the rituals are really rooted in the philosophical thinking behind the events and the ceremonies. So let's start by looking at the beliefs and concepts about death and life. So as we know that this cycle of birth and death is at the heart of this thinking, is that there is a birth, there is a death, but then there is a birth again, and then there is a death again. So this is called samsara, the cycle of birth and death, whereby the uh, the jiva, which is um, taken to be the core entity of this composite called the body and the mind and the intellect, this individual identity, this individual ego. Uh, at the core of it is um, this essence, which goes from one body to the next body in this cycle of birth and death. And this, I guess, is really, the rationale behind thinking about the death and the afterlife, because not only is the birth and the death affected by what we have done in the past, but what we are doing in this life as well. And then how does that actually affect the way in which we talk about and think about death and what is happening. So, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, it says that just like we go from childhood to youth to old age, and we go from one body to the next body, and it's just like we have got these old clothes which we want to get rid of, we give them up and we acquire new clothes. So just like that, the soul, as it were, uh, gives up the old body because it has completed its journey in this life, and the soul then departs and goes to another body. And in between, there are various things which are going to happen, and this is really what I'm going to talk about here. And this jiva then passes from one body to the next body, and we can think of this individual as consisting of a gross body, which is this physical gross body, and then the subtle body, which consists of the mind and the intellect and the sense of I-ness, as well as all the past impressions which are there, and then the causal body. So the causal body can be thought of as the storehouse of all our past impressions, all the conditioning, all the lives we have had in the before, and this life which we are having now. All the impressions which are gained through all our existences are available in the causal body, and that influences the way in which we perceive life, think about ourselves, and also, in a sense, to kind of experience life. So this gross body, subtle body, causal body is what we have while we are in any particular life. And what happens at the point of death is that the causal body and the subtle body get separated from the gross body. And the subtle body and the causal body is the one which then begins its journey onwards. And this is really the essential point of it, is that there is something which happens at the point of death, whereby there is separation between the subtle body and the causal body and the gross body. And what continues after that is this core essence of this jiva, which is taking it to different realms of experience. And this is what we're going to talk about Um, so the thing is that in life we go from childhood to old age, and this lifespan, as it were, consists of four stages according to our tradition. Uh, we start off by the brahmacharya stage of life, whereby it is a phase of acquiring knowledge, acquiring life experience, as it were. Through discipline, we begin to get our education, get our knowledge, and to kind of start shaping our perceptions and our thoughts and our beliefs about life. So that is the first stage. And then we got the grahastha stage, whereby the person who has come to of age gets married and lives a life of the householder. So this is the second stage of life, and whereby the family can come together in terms of having children, and sometimes the three generations live together, and this householder stage lasts until, of course, the children have grown up, they've got married, they've got their own homes, they've got their own families, etc. So that is the second stage of life. And then we've got the vanaprastha stage, which comes after the age of, traditionally after the age of 51. So it is said ekavan. For example, in Gujarati, ekavan means that alone in the forest. Literally, it means that. And that means slowly giving up one's own responsibility as far as the family is concerned, and reorientation of life towards the spiritual, towards God, towards more and more of the spiritual practices in life, and then slowly withdrawing from all the kind of responsibilities of the household, which means giving freedom and independence to the children and letting them do their own things, and at the same time refocusing one's life onto the spiritual pathway. So this is the third stage, and of course the fourth stage is the sannyas stage, whereby there is complete now focus on the spiritual life. There's nothing else to be done but except just to look after one's own health and spiritual well-being. And we can think of that, during these four stages of life, there are also four goals or efforts of life which are pursued in the course of life. And these are called the four purusharths of life, and they include dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So dharma means that living a life of dharma, and dharma, of course, is very simply translated as doing your duty, doing the right duty according to the role and the stage of your life. So whatever role you're playing, whether a husband or a wife or a child or a son or a daughter, or a grandparent or whatever it is, you take up that responsibility and do the best you can in terms of discharging that responsibility. The next one is artha. Artha means that you have to kind of look after your material life as well. Everybody has to have a house, a shelter of some sort. One has to feed oneself and to have, something to cover ourselves with, and therefore, artha means the taking care of the material life. And that the third one is karma, which means that whatever kind of desires we have, they have to be kind of sublimated into sattvic desires, which are noble desires, desires which lead us towards a higher way of living, a nobler life, and that also becomes part and parcel of our goal of life, purusharth. And then the final one is moksha, whereby the true purpose of life, according to our tradition, is seen as achieving liberation from the cycle of birth and death in which we are caught up because we are, um, you know, uh, binding ourselves through selfish actions in the world, through egocentric behavior. And to liberate ourselves means to go on the spiritual path and to disidentify with the ego identity, and therefore achieve moksha from this continuous cycle of birth and death. So the thing is that the whole purpose of life is then, if we want to achieve the purpose of life, which is to liberate ourselves from this bondage, from the cycle of birth and death, then we got to live our life in a dharmic way. So a life of dharma is what we call living a good life. And I'll explain that a bit more later on. Um, and this, as I was saying, a life of dharma really means that we are looking at how can I live my life being fully aware of my role in life, my responsibilities in life, and according to the stage of life I am in, that I discharge my duties and act responsibly in whatever I do, in relationship to the people around me, in relationship to the family, etc. And this, of course, applies to the workplace as well, is that there is a certain dharma of being in the workplace itself. So living a life of dharma then becomes our route to liberation from the cycle of birth and death. And death and rebirth means what? It means a good death and a good life. And in order to have a good death, we need to think about living a good life. And according to the tradition, again, living a good life means living a dharmic life. And a good death means that we have achieved or moved towards the true purpose of life. Okay. So it probably then means that it doesn't matter in what circumstances and how the death occurs, but it is up to that point. How has this person lived? And because this person has been moving on the path towards moksha, which is really the true purpose of life, living a good dharmic life, means that that death is now the fulfillment of a good life. So this is how these things are connected. And then once the deaths take place, of course, there is the journey between death and the next birth. And here it is about reaching what we call the Pitruloka. Pitruloka is the land of the ancestors. This is the realm of the ancestors, which the soul which has left the body now makes its journey towards the Pitruloka, and from a preta, which is what happens after death, it acquires the status of becoming the ancestors. And here there is a kind of journey which takes place. There are ceremonies which are done by the people who are left behind, and those ceremonies are in the service of this preta becoming a pitru and aiding the journey, giving the preta enough resources for it to complete the journey, reach the pitruloka, and become one of the ancestors. So this I'm also going to talk about in a bit of detail as well. And finally, we also can think about these ideas of heaven and hell. And we know that in most religions, there are kind of conceptions about what is heaven, what is hell, and what happens after death. So we are interested in learning what the afterlife is all about. And part of the thinking will focus on what do we really mean by heaven, what do we mean by hell, and the kind of different conception we have in our Hindu tradition. So these are the kind of beliefs and concepts which within which we have to think about what is happening at the up to the point of death, what happens immediately when somebody dies, the ceremonies which take place as a result of the death taking place, and what happens in the afterlife for the soul. So there's one part which we can talk about in terms of who is left behind and what are they doing for the person who is departed. And on the other hand, we can think about, okay, this person has departed, but what happens to that person as he makes his journey to Pitruloka, and what are the kind of experiences he or she goes through, and what are the things which are going to help this person to reach this land of the ancestors. Okay, so the stages of death and the rituals which are performed, we can think of in terms of these stages. So the first one is preparation for death. Now, what do we mean by preparation for death? It means, as I was saying earlier on, it is a lifetime of preparation. So if you say, what is a good death? As I was saying, a good death is a death whereby the life has been lived in a good way, in a dharmic way, which is oriented towards the ultimate purpose of life, which is to achieve liberation from the cycle of birth and death. And this really is the preparation for death. And then the death which comes about. So there are some things which happen before, just before a person is dying. So, for example, putting that person on the floor in a certain direction, the head pointing certain way and the feet pointing certain way, and giving some, holy water in the mouth, Ganga Jal, or the water from the Ganges, putting a tulsi leaf, etc. Those are the kind of things which happen, just immediately before and maybe immediately once the death takes place. Death will take place, then there is a preparation of the body itself, that what happens once the death has taken place. It is ascertained that this person is now deceased. So before the cremation can take place, there is something called the preparation of the body. And how does that happen? What is to be done? There is something about that as well. And then, of course, the journey to the cremation ground, because in this case, we are talking about the ceremony, the last ceremony called Antyeshtu, which is cremation itself. And then cremation, which normally takes place within a period of 1 to 5 days. But of course, there is a kind of big range within which it takes place. And during these times, of course, it is much more uncertain as to how long it is going to take. And carrying on further, stage number 6, collection of the ashes once the cremation has taken place, and then ashes to the river. This is day number 10. There are some ceremonies which take place, prayers to Lord Yama to assist the recently departed soul and assist him in the journey towards Pitraloka. And the prayers are kind of towards to Lord Yama. And as we know, Lord Yama is the Lord of death. He is the one who presides over death and what happens to uh, the souls as they leave the physical body and go into the realm of the afterlife. And stage number 8 is the Shraddha, which takes place on day 11, and these are prayers to Lord Vayu. Again, something which then one prays to Lord Vayu to assist again the soul who is on its way towards Pitraloka. And then stage number 9, which is called Sapinda Karana, day number 12, which is symbolic maybe of 1 year as well, whereby the Preta then transforms into a Pitru, which means it becomes an ancestor and lives with the ancestors. And this is also a very important kind of ceremony which takes place on the 12th day as well. And in fact, it is very much symbolic of the journey which takes place, and calling on the 3 generations to come together. And then the ceremony is symbolic of how the person who has just become deceased becomes part and parcel of the ancestors, say the father, the grandfather, and the ancestors before that as well. And stage number 10, ending of the religious impurity, and this is when the impurity which is taken to be arising at the point of death, that comes to an end. So this impurity means that one cannot go to the temple, one cannot do one's own puja in the home at the altar. So these kind of things come to an end on day number 13, so that one begins to then go back to one's own normal life. So this is the end of the grieving process itself. And as we will see that, most of these ceremony have not only, all of them have a religious or a spiritual significance, but at the same time, it is very supportive of the whole grieving process, because in this constant contact with the departed, deceased person through the ceremony, at the same time, the family coming together in support of this symbolic ceremonies which are taking place, it becomes a way in which the grief can be dealt with, and the grief can be processed through these ceremonies, so that one begins to get um, the benefit of going through these ceremonies and processing the grief. And then finally, of course, there is the annual Shraddh. So every year at the time of this Shraddh, and these are called the days of Shraddh, which come every year. I will explain what these are. And when I think this year it is going to be the first weeks, 2 weeks of September. So we'll also talk about that as well. Okay, so let's now talk about the journey beyond, the stages of death and the journey beyond. So let's first of all look at the stages of death, preparation for death and the moment of death. Now this is, before we reach to a place of the death and the funeral. And of course, as I mentioned, that there is something which needs to be done before the death itself. So when we talk about the preparation for death, then what are we talking about? We are talking about living a good life, which I already mentioned, is that, throughout life, we are thinking about, am I living a good life? And from our tradition, living a good life means living a dharmic life, living a noble life, which is full of noble values and virtues. And these are, of course, mentioned throughout our scriptures as to how should one kind of act in the world, what kind of beliefs one should have, what are the attitudes in life one should have, and the primary values of satyam, truthfulness, ahimsa, non-violence, and brahmacharya, which means self-discipline in life. These are the ways in which one can kind of live one's life. And as I mentioned, living a dharmic life is also, the way in which we can think about living a good life. So before and sometimes when we have the time and the opportunity, of course, it's a matter of settling all affairs. And conflicts and issues are to be resolved. Not that we should live it to the end of the time. It means that whenever we can, wherever we can, we begin to settle everything day by day, year by year. We are trying to resolve all these conflicts and issues which have come up during our living experience. And therefore, as we go along, we are settling all these things. We are not waiting, saying, okay, I'm going to do this, once I reach a certain point in my life where I will have time to do this. No, it's a matter of just processing everything as we go along. Because really, death is unpredictable. We don't know when this is going to happen. And therefore, it is good to live a good life at the same time trying to, make sure that we resolve all the outstanding issues and settle all affairs. Goodbye to all friends and relatives, because, when one is conscious that life is kind of coming to an end, this is what it means, is that friends and relatives have to be kind of called and to say goodbyes to them, etc. If and when the opportunity arises, because sometimes it doesn't arise. And therefore, the lesson is that we've got to maintain our relationships in such a way that that particular sense of, yes, I've got closure as far as the family is concerned, as far as friends and relatives and everybody else is concerned. I'm not leaving anything behind. The issues which may have been there, constantly attempting to resolve them and so on. And again, focus on spiritual matters so that, for example, I know that, a friend of mine whose mother had ended up in hospital before the COVID virus, and of course he wanted to know really what should we be doing while she is kind of in her last days. And of course, it's a matter of just listening to spiritual matters, listening to bhajans and chanting the name of the Lord, listening to various different mantras and chanting the mantras. That becomes a way in which the mind becomes focused on the spiritual life, focused on God. Because like Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, is that what is happening at the end point of your life is really going to affect where you go and how you go and what happens in your next birth. But of course, a lifetime of chanting and listening will enable you to do that. It's not that at the last minute we think, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want for the whole of my life, and the last minute I will start chanting the name of the Lord, and then everything will be all right. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of living a good life so that this comes naturally, so that even on my last breath, I want to have the name of the Lord on my lips as I depart from this body. So the moment of death, one is laid on the prepared floor. Here, preparation means that certain things are done to purify that ground, and Mother Earth is the one which takes protection of this soul who is about to depart. The head is facing north, the feet are facing south. Ganges water and tulsi is placed in the mouth, and chanting of the mantra as the death occurs. Now, as I was saying, this sometimes is possible, but many times it is not possible because the person may be in hospital, maybe nobody around there, and this opportunity of putting the person on the floor may not happen. But really, this is the kind of way in which the scriptures talk about it, and of course we want to try and see how this can be done to whatever extent it can be done, so that even if one says, okay, yeah, I've come to this point whereby the person is just about on the last breath, and can I have some Ganges water and tulsi to be placed in the mouth? So that is part and parcel of doing whatever we can at the moment of death. And of course, the feet facing south has got a certain significance because the realm of Yama, the Lord of Death, is in the south. And in order to kind of start preparing for that, the feet are put in the southerly direction, so that we know that now this is the direction in which the soul needs to make its journey. And Ganges water is, of course, the holy water. It signifies that the impurities can be also released from the dying person by means of taking in the Ganges water. Tulsi is also auspicious in that sense that it gives purity, and these are placed in the mouth. And of course, through the ears, one is listening to the chanting of the mantra as the death occurs, so that the name of the Lord is present at the moment, and therefore that also kind of helps the person uh, who is dying and on the last moments of death. Then, once the death has taken place, of course, the body is prepared, bathing, clothing, adorning the body in various different ways. And of course, there are certain ways in which this is done. So, for example, if somebody has passed away and is a widower or a widow, then they are kind of, adorned in certain ways, and so on and so on. If somebody has died without any kind of married life, then she dies as a kanya, or an unmarried lady, then certain kind of she is adorned with a certain kind of clothing, with full jewelry and so on and so on. So in Britain, of course, we have got this tradition of now placing the body in the coffin with flowers, etc. And sometimes, um, some other articles may be placed, which is not really necessary. But the main thing is that the coffin is done in the right way with the flowers, and the balls of rice which are prepared. They are also placed in the coffin itself, um, and this is how preparation takes place in this. So of course, we see that as the diaspora kind of goes to different countries, certain of the traditions may change, and they are adapted to the way in which your life is lived in that particular country. And of course, being in the Western world, there is no open cremation ground which is available, and whatever happens is really done through placing the body in the coffin and taking it to the crematorium, whereby it is kind of done in the furnace itself. So these are adaptations according to the kind of circumstance and situation in which one finds oneself. And as I was saying, these are the rice, wheat, barley balls which are made up, and they are made up before the journey towards the cremation ground takes place. and the 16 balls are placed in various places. And of course, there is a reason why there are 16 balls, as I will explain later, because the soul passes after the 13 days. The soul has to pass through 16 different cities, as it were, in the afterlife. And each of these cities requires this preta to be having some kind of nourishment for him to continue the journey. So, for example, when I go from here to Scotland, I need to stop on the way, and there I take some nourishment, and then carry on my journey. I'll make another stop for another nourishment, and so on and so on. So just like that, the people who are left behind, they know this preta is going to make that journey and prepare the 16 balls, and they are kind of placed in various places symbolically to represent the 16 places where the the preta is going to stop and take some nourishment. So 6 up to the cremation ground, and then 10 for each day after. So these are placed, in various different places. For example, right at the doorstep of the house, then at the crossroads, then finally at the cremation ground, and so on and so on. So there are 6 different specific places where these are supposed to be placed, and the 10 which are left after 1 day each after the cremation has taken place, they are also kind of offered to the departed person. And nourishment and protection for the departed is through this kind of uh, offering to the departed. And this balls represent the nourishment which he or she is going to take on its way towards the um, towards the land of the departed, the Pitraloka, or the land of the ancestors. So not only the nourishment is provided, but also like on the 13th day, on the 12th day when the ceremony is done, the formation of the new body of the departed actually is through this kind of ceremony where the balls are made up and they're created, and then they're mixed up, which gives a new body. Because remember, the departed soul does not have a kind of body in which it can make its journey. So, in a symbolic way, this is offered to the departed to form this new body so that it can continue the journey. And then, of course, the funeral ceremony itself takes place, and there are elaborate rituals which are associated with that as well. And normally it is the eldest son, or in the absence of the eldest son, of course, now things have changed and adapted so that even the daughters can take up some of these uh, things which was supposed to be done by the eldest son. So the journey beyond. Then we have talked about all the stages, right, leading up to the point of death. What happens there? We've seen what happens on the way to the cremation ground, and also the cremation itself. And then of course cremation has its own way in which it is done here in the UK. And then of course the journey beyond, and this is something which really is at the focus of our talk here today. And we have to think about the care of the new preta. Now, preta means the person who has departed is given this name called preta. And he is in this transitional form, as it were, not not alive in this sense, having this gross physical body, but on the other hand, not quite yet made it to the land of the ancestors and become an ancestor himself or herself. So it requires for the living who are left behind to take care of this new preta, and provide all the support for that preta to make that journey. And of course, the preta will follow different pathways depending on what kind of life he or she has led, and what are the kind of experiences it has gathered. and there are different pathways which I'll talk about later on, and the transformation of the preta into a pitru. So this is the most important thing, is that the transformation has to take place, and once the transformation has taken place, then this person now becomes, or this soul becomes part of the ancestors who have departed before him. And finally, it is the land of the ancestors where he now resides, and then we'll see how that happens as well. What is this Pitruloka? What happens there, and so on and so on. So the journey beyond. So the care of the new preta, how is that going to be done? The new preta has got a sukshma sharira, and it requires this kind of body in order for it to make the journey, and it must be kept fed and watered. So water and pinda are offered every day. Remember, those 10 pindas were left behind. These are offered on a daily basis, and water is poured as well onto that. And this is now becomes nourishment for the preta as it moves on onto its journey. And the Ativahika Sharira is formed from, this Sharir means the body. So this Ativahika body is really a body which is uh, available to this preta through the offerings which are made by those who have been left behind. So these ceremonies, that's why I was saying these ceremonies are symbolic in that way, because on the one hand, it provides a kind of way of processing one's grief, but at the same time, it is also helping and taking care of this new preta who is beginning its journey towards Pitraloka. And this sharir, which is formed from these offerings of the pindas which are given, they allow this preta to then carry on in its forward journey in the afterlife. And in the Mahabharata, it says that the pretas are various different kinds, and categorizes into 3 different kinds of pretas, depending on what kind of life they have lived. So there's the one Uttam preta, Madhyam preta, and Adhama preta. Uttam is the highest, Madhyam is the middle, and Adam is the lowest. In the Mahabharata says each one then experiences the afterlife in a different way. Why? Because how you have lived your life, as I was saying before, also affects the way in which you're going to experience this journey in between death and reaching the Pitralok as well. So each one will experience it in a different way, which I'll explain in a little while. And the experience of the journey itself are according to these 3 categories. So journey after the 13th day begins by the workers of Yama, the Lord of Death. So Yamaduta are the workers of Yama, and they come, the servants of Yama, they come, they take the soul, and they take this jiva to uh, Yamanagar, the city of the Lord of Death, where Lord Yama is residing and presiding. So this preta is then taken after the 13th day, and you remember by that time the living have finished all their job as far as the ceremonies and everything is concerned. So the 10th day ceremony, 11th day ceremony, 12th day ceremony takes place, and on the 13th day the impurity, the religious impurity, is then kind of left behind, so that purity again returns to the family and they start going to the temple, etc., etc. By that time, now the jiva is beginning its journey to the city of the Lord of Death. And when it is on its way, it passes through 7 cities before the Vaitarni river. So this Vaitarni river is like a boundary between the whereby the preta is experiencing various different things, and by the time it reaches the river, which is then crossed onto the other side, whereby there are other experiences to be had before one reaches the Yamnagar. This Vaitari river is whereby people just give up all their, you know, papa, whatever they've done bad, they can kind of leave it behind. And the Vaitari river is said to be full of all this, you know, muck which has been left behind by all the people who have crossed that. I will explain a bit more detail about that a bit later on. And then here the Preta meets Yama, that the Yamnaga, who directs the pathway of the Jiva. So they meet Yama, and Yama says, okay, now you had a good life, I want you to go in this direction, or you haven't had such a good life, or you've not lived such a good life. This is the direction in which you need to go, and therefore this is now determined by the judgment which is made by Chitragupta, who keeps a record of all the things which we do in our life. Each and every act which we have carried out in thought, word, and deed, that record is being kept by the by the what you call by Chitragupta, who is the dispenser of justice, and therefore he knows everything which has taken place in life, and therefore can decide whether the life has been lived in a good way or not, and then accordingly the jiva is or the preta is given its experiences, so that it can learn from those experiences, and therefore in the next life, therefore some of these things may uh, be of benefit to the person who comes back into another body, another life. So where the preta meets Yama, the bad souls are then sent to Chitragupta. Now, bad means that those people who have not really followed the prescriptions of the scriptures, or they have not kind of lived a noble life or a moral life. And like I was saying, the three categories out of that, Madhyama, Adama, they may be sent to to Chitragupta, the judge of the dead, who then sends them to the seven lower worlds. Now, these lower worlds are what is called the Narakloka, or the hells. So remember, I was talking about hell and heaven. The concepts of hell and heaven are in this way described in our scriptures. And of course, there are various different conceptions of heaven and hell and the journey beyond. So just to remember that this is like an overall generalized presentation I'm doing, but there are variations in terms of not only the ceremonies which take place, but also how the journey is described in the afterlife. According to the kind of tradition you follow in Hinduism, there is a difference in terms of the North Indian way of doing it and the South Indian way of doing it. There may be differences even within those regions of, the kind of um, ethnic background, or the kind of traditions which you follow. So there are variations all over the place, but this is like a generalized picture of really what happens. So the seven lower worlds, which are called Patala Loka, Naraka Loka, and these are where the suffering takes place and people experience different kinds of suffering. And the good souls, on the other hand, may go to some of these places, but eventually they go to the higher worlds called the Svargaloka, or the heavens, and then finally they come back and they go to the land of the ancestors. So one can think of these, 14 lokas, whereby Earth is somewhere situated on the seventh, the lowest plane of the seven higher worlds. And I'll show you what those worlds are anyway. So these are the heavens, these are the Swargaloka, and the good souls, as they go to those higher worlds, enjoy the things which are there. Or they may be going, sent to some of the lower worlds, and then they go to the higher worlds and so on. But eventually, of course, everybody lands up in the world of the ancestors. Unless, of course, they are exceptional souls, whereby they go even beyond the higher worlds to places where God resides. And these are exceptional cases. So as I said, they may be first sent to the low worlds, and then they climb to the higher worlds as well. And In the lower worlds, these are what is available. So Patala Loka, there's the Atala, Vitala, Sutala, etc. These are called the lower worlds, and each one is kind of has got a ruler, and there are residents in each one of them. So, for example, Patala is the lowest one, and it is ruled by Vasuki. This is the king of the serpents, and it is a land of serpents, whereby all the serpents reside in this realm, and the preta goes there, is kind of encounters all these serpents, and may have difficult experiences passing through these lower planes. And of course, there are other classifications as well, which are given in the scriptures. So the lower worlds are sometimes named Rorva, Maharorva, Atisita, um, Nishprintana, etc. And each one is a realm of suffering. So, for example, Atisita is a frozen, dark world, extremely cold. And here, the Preta may have to stay for a while and gets completely frozen. Whereas the Rorva and the Maharorva are places which are very hot, boiling hot. So that, it's like uh, how we normally picture hell, full of fire, full of this heat which is there. On the other hand, this is a frozen. It's extremely cold, and it's very dark, and it's again a place of suffering. So the higher world, Bhuloka, is the earthly plane, and there are 6 planes which are above Bhuloka. And Bhuva is this where the semi-divine beings are resident, and then there's Swaha, which is where the Devas stay, Mahar, where the great stages are, Jana, where the sons of Brahma, Tapa, where all the deities are found, and Satyaloka, the abode of Brahma himself. So Brahma, of course, as we know, is a creator, according to the Hindu Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. So Brahma is the creator, Vishnu is a sustainer, Shiva is a destroyer, and this is the abode of Brahma, which is the highest you can go. So even Bhagavad Gita talks about Brahmaloka. You can go right up to Brahmaloka because you've done so much punya, you've done so much good deeds in your life, and there is always a possibility that if you go to that particular abode of Brahma, that there is a possibility of liberation from that plane, so that you don't have to come back to earthly plane again to take another birth. And of course, Satyaloka, as the kind of the merits which are built up, so you go higher and higher and higher, and the most meritorious souls actually go to the Satyaloka. And beyond these are the lands of the God. So when we talk about Vaikuntha and Kailash and all these places where gods themselves are there, this is really where now we go beyond the realms of the higher worlds. So this, in a sense, we can talk about as all the planes, higher planes, the Swargaloka, different realms of experience, and one can come across great sages, for example, in the Mahaloka, and enjoy their company, enjoy the satsang which is going on, and get benefit of that as well. So the Preta and the different pathways. So as I mentioned, the 3 categories which are mentioned in the Mahabharata, there's the Uttama Preta, which is received with great respect by the Yama messengers. So when the Yamaduta come to take the soul away, they're treated with great respect. They're given special kind of dispensation in terms of the kind of vehicle they are given, the journey they make is very pleasant, and depending on the depending on the devotion, sometimes of course the messengers of Vishnu come to collect, not Yama. And there are of course stories in the Mahabharata and other scriptures which tell us these kind of things where the departing soul, instead of Yama sending the messengers, Vishnu himself sends, because there's such devotion in this person who is departing that Vishnu sometimes himself comes to receive this departing soul. And there is a pleasant journey to the Yamaloka and brief meeting with Yama, because Lord Yama knows this is a good soul, immediate transfer to the higher realms, Swargaloka, and Shraddha and other rituals may become secondary for such a preta because it's already acquired so much resource in terms of their good deeds, meritorious deeds, so that they have enough resource for them to actually take them straight into the high worlds. And Shraddha and other rituals which are taking place are really, secondary in that sense because they already have all the stuff they need, all the things they need for making the journey. And the Madhyama is the one who is received with some respect by the Yama messengers. Straightforward journey to Yamaloka meets Yama's secretary Chitragupta. As I was saying, this is the one who dispenses the justice. And Yama then sends the Preta to Pitraloka for a fixed period, and he may then go to various different realms after that as well. But normally it is a fixed period in the Pitraloka and then down back into the earthly plane. So Shraddha and other rituals are important for such a preta because it may not have enough resources for it to make the journey, and therefore they become important things for that preta to take with him on its onward journey in the afterlife. And then the Adama. So here the Yama messengers may come in fearful form. There's a painful journey to Yamaloka, does not meet Yama or Chitragupta, only the deputies, and sent to Narakaloka where suffers for some time. Shraddha and other rituals then become very important for such preta because it doesn't have its own resources which has built up in this life, and therefore it needs all the support it can get. Of course, these are things which are mentioned in the scriptures, Garud Puran, the other scriptures which mention this kind of journeys which are made by the by the departed. So the transformation of the preta into the pitru, this is really the essential point of this journey of going beyond, so that the preta then going through all these experiences and the support which is given by the living, it eventually turns into a pitru. Pitru means ancestor, basically. And then becoming a pitru, then he qualifies to stay with the ancestors in the land of the ancestors. It is said that it takes 1 year. Now, the 1 year is, again, there is a difference in terms of how time is experienced in the afterlife as it is experienced here. So maybe, for example, 1 day here may be something else altogether in the afterlife. And 1 year on the earthly plane may be equivalent to 1 day in the afterlife. So there are also accounts of that kind of difference in terms of the time. So while it is on the journey, it feeds on the 16 balls which have been offered by the family. The balls of rice and wheat and barley, which are made up and then offered by the family. They reach it, and of course it nourishes itself and moves onto the journey in the afterlife. It assumes the form according to karma and the offerings of the shad, and this form which is acquired, is according to what has been offered, and also its own karma. And then it lives in Pitralok until the time it has to return back to its earthly plane, because now the next life is to be lived according to the past karma, and this past karma then manifest themselves as prarabdha karma in this life, and therefore it continues. It's another cycle of coming into life, coming into a bodily form, and then exhausting that one again, going back again into Pitraloka, and then coming back again. So the land of the ancestors called Pitraloka was created by Brahma with the Nitya Pitra, and this Nitya Pitra are the permanent residents, as it were, of Pitraloka. The others are kind of, transitory occupants of Pitraloka. And here this is mentioned in the Varaha Puran and Vishnu Puran. So there are 3 categories: the Somya, Varhishat, and Agnishatva. And each group has got specific duties. And of course, There are duties which each one of them takes up, and they kind of keep the Pitraloka running. And they are prayed to for attaining blessings. So we can pray to this. There are certain ceremonies which are kind of aimed at, invoking blessings from these keepers of Pitraloka, so that they can look after the Nemitka Pitra and the living beings as well. So, for example, if somebody has passed away and is, gone to Pitraloka, then some prayers are said for the Pitru through these categories of people who look after the Pitraloka, and therefore they are urged to, look after the Pitrus who's gone there. So this is the journey beyond, and of course we can now look at Shraddh itself. What are the rituals which are carried out up to the point whereby the 13th day, whereby then it comes to an end. What is Shraddh? Why do the ritual of Shraddh? When is it done? And what is the ritual of Shraddh? So Shraddh is derived from the Sanskrit Shraddha. It is the two terms are related together. And Shraddha means what? A firm belief about something which has not yet been experienced. And what it says in the Brahma Purana is whatever is given with faith for the benefit of the Pitru at the proper time and place and procedure is Shraddh. So this is the definition given in the Brahma Purana, that whatever is given, this is called Shraddh. So this is mentioned in the ancient text. Mentioned some of them, Garud Purana, Rig Veda, Griha Sutras as well, and some of the Upanishads also have references to the afterlife and Shraddh, etc. And Shraddh denotes basically three things. One is a havan or a homa which takes place, offering of the pindas. You remember the pindas are the balls of wheat and rice and barley which are prepared so that they can be offered to the preta for formation of the body, and then gratification of the preta by offering food to the Brahmins. So sometimes Brahmins are called to the ceremony, they are fed, and the feeding the Brahmins means that you're feeding the ancestors, you're feeding the preta which has just departed. And this is normally the time of the dark fortnight of the Bhadrapad month for yearly homage. So Shraddh is also done on a yearly basis, besides the rituals which take place before the 13th day. And this is sometimes August, September sometimes. So the first 10 days after the after the deceased has taken leave, the chief mourner and the priest daily go to the riverbank to offer one pinda and a cup of water with sesame poured over it, and the priest offer prayers to the departed. Each day the number of cups of water increases. So first day 1 cup, second day 2 cups, etc. Each day the number of cups increases. These allow the formation of the body of the preta, and for the first days also a lamp is kept lit in the house at the place of death. Another lamp is hung outside, and with a pot with water and milk hung from a tree to nourish the preta. So you can see how the living has to take care of the preta while it is still kind of making the transition to becoming a pitru. And these are all the things which are important. So the lamp is hung outside just to show that this is a place, this is a house. There's a lamp inside as well to mark the departed soul as well. And on the 11th day, the elaborate ceremony of the 16 Shraddh is performed and sometimes combined with the 12-day ritual as well. And there's a certain kind of variation of how these are done. And this is really to prepare the preta for the year-long journey. And it establishes in the surviving son as the head of the family. When this ceremony is done now, the head of the family is taken to be the surviving son, and in of course many of the cases it is the eldest son. And gifts are made to the priests and the Brahmins as part of this ceremony. And as I was saying that the feeding of the Brahmins is part and parcel of the ceremony, so that reaches the preta as well, and helps it on its journey. So on the 12th day, then this Pinda Karana ceremony is done, which involves joining the Pinda of the deceased, the father, the grandfather, and the great grandfather, Pitamaha. And this is done in a kind of elaborate way, and it may be the Brahmins may be invited to represent the 3 generations, or kusha grass is taken as well instead, and the 4 pindas are made to represent the deceased and the 3 generations, and then they get kind of mixed up together, putting them into sections and then mixing them up, so that symbolically this means that now this 3 generations have come together, and the person who has just departed becomes part of this generations of ancestors who are represented by those 3 balls, and the 4th one which represents the deceased. Tarpan is offered to the god, devatas, ancestors, water, milk, sesame. This is to propitiate the blessings and the good wishes of the gods and the devatas and the ancestors as well. And Vishnu Puja is done at the same time on this 12th day. And the Preta Pinda is divided into 3 with gold, silver, wire, or darba grasa, and each one is then mixed up with the other, and then it becomes like a pinda, which is then becomes the symbolically representing the formation of the Pitru from the Preta. So it becomes an ancestor, and it joins the land of the ancestors, and this is done on the 12th day. And in a sense that represents the 12 months of the journey, which has taken place. Okay, so each of the 3 pieces is then blended with each of the 3 ancestors. So the 3 pieces which belong to the one who has departed of the ball, each one of these then mixed with each of the 3 ancestors. And each time you say, may you go to your father, to your grandfather, to your great-grandfather. And at this moment, the Preta becomes the Pitru. So you can see how the ceremony is also important in terms of, not only the journey and the nourishment, but also giving the body and symbolically kind of helping the Preta to become a Pitru. And at the same time, silver cow, a silver boat, ladder, sandals are offered for the journey of the Preta. You remember on the Vaitarani river, there is the boatman, and the boatman, if you want to get on the boat, he asks for a cow, and this silver cow is the one which represents that offering which is made to the boatman to carry you across the river, and the silver boat is the one which is used to cross the Vaitarani river. The Brahmins are offered food and gifts at the same time, and the pindas are deposited in a river or offered to the cross. And after this, the Suttaka or the impurity ends, and there may be a feast right up to the 16th day. So on the 13th day, all this is then, everything comes to an end, and the 13th day becomes now the place where that marks the transition between observing this Suttaka and then going on to one's own normal way of life. So here we can see a bit of this ceremony. So you can see the pindas which are already prepared. You can see how he's placing them on the grass, the kusha grass, and then he's chanting the mantras, putting the water as well. So these are the priests, and they are doing for a specific person, and they're chanting the name of the ancestors as well, and he's putting all those in around there, and then eventually all of them are going to be mixed up together. Okay, so that gives us an idea how some of these ceremonies are done. So this ceremony of Shraddh during Pitru Paksha. So Pitru Paksha is at 15, 16 days during which every year the offering to the ancestors are made. Why is it done? When it is done? What is the ritual of Shraddh? So these are the 16 days of the ancestors in Bhadrapad. And this year it is going to be from the 1st of September to the 16th of September. And this is about honoring of the ancestors by offering food and gifts. And this is also related to the legend of Karna, going to heaven. So in the Mahabharata, there's the story of Karna. Karna was one of the greatest warriors mentioned in the Mahabharata. And he is the one who was fighting with the Kauravas. And what happens is that after he passes away, he goes to heaven, and every day he is being given jewels and jewelry to feed on. So he kind of endures it for a few days, and then he goes to Lord Indra and says, "Why are you giving me jewels and jewelry for eating? I'm not going to be fed by these kind of things." So Lord Indra says, "Actually, you know what happened? When you are giving gifts and offering things to the Lord, all you were giving was jewelry and jewels. So this is what you get here." So in other words, what we are saying is that the offering of the food and the gifts is really to make sure that when the Pitru is there in the land of the ancestors, it's not receiving jewels and jewelry. It is actually receiving the food which nourishes it. So the three components are usually of this ceremony: the pinda, the balls which we saw just now, which the priest was putting on the grass, and then tarpan, which is the pouring of the water, and the third thing is the feeding of the Brahmins. And ceremony like this, Apindakana, can be done 11, 12 days after the death. So there is a bit of variation here as to when people do the 10-day ceremony, 11-day, 12-day, and sometimes two of these can be combined together and they're done at the same time. So 11, 12 days after death. So Pitru Paksha, from the beginning of Pitru Paksha for a month, the three generations of Pitrus leave Pitraloka and reside in the descendants' home. Now, so what does that mean? It means that actually the Pitru leave their Pitraloka and come back on the earthly plane, as it were, and reside in the descendants' home. So that's why that month and especially those 16 days important to keep on feeding, because they want to see the generation which is going on now. They want to enjoy the food as well, and therefore they come as if they are residing in the descendants' home. So for the first half, descendants are expected to propitiate them with food, water, etc. Now these are the 16 days of Shraddha, whereby every day some food is given to the ancestors and they keep on feeding for those 16 days. And this ensures that the Pitrus attain their place in heaven. So again, receiving the blessings and getting the blessings as well, and also blessing them with food and water, and to offer them all these things enables them to attain their place in heaven, because the blessing eventually passed to them. So this Shraddha actually is one of the three obligatory debts which everyone must fulfill. So this is called Pitru Rin. So the three debts are the debts to the Devas, the debts to the Rishis, our teachers, and the debt to the Pitru. So something has to be offered to them, because the Devas have given us this creation to live in. They have given us all the forces of nature which are there for us to kind of live with and to enjoy. And this whole creation is there. The Rishis have given us this knowledge, and the Pitrus have given us this life and this bodily form, and therefore all these things are important for us to return, as it were, and these are debts which have to be discharged in one's life. It is remembering the departed with reverence and honoring them. It is also for seeking their blessing, and the ancestors bless with a long life, progeny, wealth, learning, and heaven. So it is important in this case that the Pitrus are offered all these things, they're honored, and therefore this returns to us as different colors of blessings in our own lives. So how do we know this reaches? In the Garud Puran, it says, just as the calf finds its own mother, the food finds the right ancestors. So that when we are offering the food on the earthly plane, sometimes we worry, is this really going to reach my ancestor, or is somebody else going to take hold of this food and eat it up? No, it is going to reach the right ancestors, just as Garud Puran is telling us. So the most important center for doing Shraddha is called Gaya. This is in India. There are other places as well, Haridwar, Banaras, Siddhapur, and there are families I know who go every year to Gaya to perform this ceremony of Shraddha, just like we watched on that short clip. The deities which are invoked are the Vasus, the Rudras, and the Adityas. These are then part and parcel of these ceremonies, invocation of these deities. So you can here see the person holding the ball, and the tarpan is being done, the water is being poured. It's part of this feeding of the ancestors. Here you can see a roll of balls which are there as well. And elaborate ceremonies are taking place whereby you can see some fruits which are there. And here are the priests who are doing the ceremonies for the family, and it is an elaborate ceremony which takes place. Here one can see the water being poured as what is known as tarpan, water being poured as part of the nourishment which keeps the preta going, and also for the pitru to partake of this water and nourishment. So it is a big story, and for my grandniece, some of the things I explained to her in her own kind of understanding and the way she would understand it. This is what I explained to my niece and my nephews as well, and other people who have asked me these questions again and again. I think it's a good way of explaining um, not only what death is all about, because at the moment that is very much on our minds, and we need to. There are lots of questions in lots of people's mind, and especially when there are so many restrictions, it is a good to kind of understand some of these things according to our traditions. So we have talked about the beliefs and concepts about death and life. We have talked about the stages of death and the journey beyond. We have talked about the Shraddha and what happens after death, offering to the Preta, ceremony of Shraddha during Pitru Paksha as well, and offerings which are made to the ancestors, the Pitru. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy that